Jordy, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us.
No, thank you so much for having me.
You just wanted to tell us a little bit about your entrepreneurial journey from the start and what the business you're doing now does.
Yeah, cool. I might actually start with the business, which is we manufacture compostable stretch wrap here in Melbourne. We offer consumer wrap or glad wrap alternative. We offer pallet wrap for freight logistics, and then we offer cling film for food service and retailers. So we sort of sit across three categories, offering a compostable, safe solution for customers here in Australia and then overseas. Personally, I used to be a winemaker. I had nothing to do with packaging, had very little interest in getting into packaging. I was pretty happy. I had my own vineyard. I started a wine label from scratch with a handshake agreement on a lease in a vineyard in Red Hill on the Mornington Peninsula, where I farmed organically and biodynamically, and was very passionate about biodiversity and how I could care for that vineyard to produce wines that would speak of the time and place. And that was a really good business and lifestyle. And wines were in great restaurants from Melbourne to New York. And then I met Julia and sort of somewhere along that journey got together enough money to buy a small vineyard in the Otway Ranges, southern Victoria, and met Julia at a pub at a rooftop, and we hit it off immediately. And it was, I think within 6 months, we'd sort of registered the name Great Wrap, and she was an architect working for Cox Architecture, designing low carbon bodybuilding and looking at environmental footprints of construction and how she could improve that. But we both had this huge frustration, felt like there wasn't being enough put towards climate and plastic waste. It was areas that we were passionate about materials, and how could we put that knowledge and expertise into play in a business. And we wanted to focus on plastic. We wanted to focus on compostable plastics as opposed to fossil fuel derived plastics. And we wanted to focus on what was the largest total addressable market, which is a product for pallet wrap is that product. And it's often one that isn't seen because it sits in a distribution center or a warehouse. But it is also one of the largest, if not the largest form of single use flexible films in Australia, just because of our lack of recycling infrastructure. The majority goes to landfill. So we really wanted to start a business to sort of address that. And yeah, that was kind of the journey of where we sort of started and how we got here today.
So in terms of the business, when you're coming up with the idea for what to do, does it come from an awesome business opportunity, or does it come from this is a massive problem we need to fix? Which one was the driver?
I think the driver was like frustration and anger at not seeing enough done. And I think it's easy to put the blame on big corporations, and rightly so. Like sometimes they're definitely at fault, but it's easier to kind of blame big corporations. But really the blame is on the lack of innovation. And that kind of was wherein lied the opportunity. And so it was first that anger towards larger kind of corporations not doing enough to address, plastic waste and climate change. But then there just wasn't economically feasible innovation to kind of help address the targets that they were setting. And then that kind of opened a door of like, well, why can't we create a product that performs the same and costs the same and kind of help businesses solve that problem rather than be just like angry at the status quo. And I think that kind of anger gave birth to, excitement and opportunity.
So you've got the idea of like, we want to do something about this. Then you've got to go about, presumably, creating a product. Or was there something that you'd already seen that was like, oh, well, that exists? Or how did that come about?
Yeah, there's definitely kind of products out there that were okay, but there's this thing wrong with it. There's pros and cons, and the cons sort of outweigh the pros. And so it was kind of like that bit of a discovery of, well, like, what is the material going to be made of? And then how would we do it? The product that we wanted to create didn't exist yet, but we could kind of build a picture of what we wanted it to look like and be made of. And then we're able to take that to Monash University. We're able to get some funding from the Australian government, and we were able to kind of commence that sort of research, which then led to us setting up a pilot facility that we kind of spun that technology out of or from Monash University and started producing our own material at a pilot facility in Hastings on the Mornington Peninsula. And that was it sort of enabled us to produce a product for consumers, because we knew that to produce a commercial product, we need to do it at an enormous scale and need a lot more capital. So how do we get something out of the market that's just like, let's get some revenue, let's get some media wins, let's get some customers excited about what we're doing. And so we focused on consumer products, and it just happened, it was during COVID, everyone was at home, everyone was cooking more. They were concerned about their plastic waste. And so offering an alternative to cling film that everyone has in their kitchen, whether they use it once a week or once a year, everyone has it sitting there. And so it's kind of creating a sustainable alternative that was made in Australia with this like great, exciting technology really hit a note with a lot of people and allowed us to kind of get that sort of media and set up that first facility, which, yeah, like I said, that sort of innovation and technology developed with Monash University.
And what was the sort of time frame from when you started the business to then having the product ready? And how challenging was that?
Yeah, it was brutal. I've never met anyone who's gone, yeah, look, we had an idea and
It was super easy.
yeah. So it was hard, but I think so. What we did was we had the idea, and before we had started working with Monash, we developed kind of like a beta version where we got someone to make something for us. And again, it was those like all of the cons outweighing the pros, but it was still something that we could show people, and we could put on a website, and we got a contract manufactured overseas. It wasn't great in terms of technology, in terms of sustainability, but it was something. And it was just something to kind of go like, look, let's build a website, get a pallet of this, and let's just put it on Instagram and see if anyone buys it. And we, sold out overnight, and we did $30,000 in orders. And we were like, okay, that's validated that there's an interest, a sustainable alternative to pallet wrap. And so then after that, it was kind of that customer journey where we probably spoke to about 100 different small and large consumers of pallet wrap, because the cling wrap side kind of came later and by default, because we just realized we could never produce it at cost that was sort of required. So it was kind of later in the path. We're really focused on pallet wrap. And so, yeah, we spoke to everyone from like Pinard, Ricard, to Treasury, to small wine producers, to folks in the construction industry, just big and small, who use pallet wrap. And it's like, look, if the price got to this, and it was made of these materials and it was compostable, would you buy it? And why wouldn't you buy it? Or why would you buy it? And having those sort of conversations, and those kind of gave us that conviction to go apply for funding, work with Monash, set up a pilot facility, and kind of get those kind of wheels in motion. So from when we had the idea to that MVP product was probably about 6 months. And then from having the MVP to having our pilot facility operating was probably about 14 months, I would say. So look, in terms of like deep tech, hardware, whatever space, climate tech we fit in, it's really quick level of innovation. And I think really that was driven by the part of before we've got a long kind of technology roadmap that we're on. But what we really focused on in the early days was how do we make a product using materials that are available today to make it perform well and cost at a price that's competitive. And so we're really focused on like, how do we just get this out on the market now, and using what we create from materials that already existed today to kind of create formulations that then would inform our final sort of product. So that's kind of how we're able to speed things up and get something on the market and get some runs on the board early.
Did you raise money in that early stage, or at what point? Because you've raised money along the way. I think you've done a seed round and a Series A of about 24 million, give or take.
Yeah, 24 debt and equity, correct? Yeah.
Yeah, okay. And then more recently, I think you've raised another few $1 million this year. Have you noticed a change in the market from that perspective in terms of the ability to raise money?
Yeah, absolutely. So like when we started, Julia and I were not interested in raising capital. We wanted to do it on our own terms. We wanted to slowly build the business. And then at some point we realized we had to weigh up owning 100% of the company and doing it at our own pace. And we're like really, ambitious, like fast moving people. But at the same time, we didn't want to lose control or perceive to be lose control. But at the time we also had to weigh up like, this is an impact-driven company. We're trying to create scalable change and impact. And if we do it with our own capital 20 years from now, we might sort of start to reach that target. But realistically, we're not going to do it in 3 or 5 years. So we need to focus on raising capital and investment. And that's why we went down that path. But then I guess in the early stages, it was really, it's obviously easier when you're raising smaller amounts of capital as well. But it was a lot easier to raise capital because I think, and look, I'm obviously not a VC, I'm not an investor in anything, but it felt to me like in, say, 2020, 2021, a lot of VCs in institutional investors were probably more interested in, hey, this is like great technology. You'll probably figure out how to make it economically feasible at a later stage, but we'll just take a risk and like, whether it's, making, I don't know, whether it's anything from direct air capture to turning seaweed into bioplastics, all like really exciting, interesting technology. but economically sort of do it is really, really challenging. But I think people in those sort of early 2020s were really willing to take kind of those risks on products that probably weren't economically feasible. But what I feel I'm seeing in the market now is like, how are you going to make this price parity or cheaper? Because the only way you're going to hit scale is it has to be price parity or cheaper than status quo. The idea of like a green premium doesn't exist anymore. Like obviously it's a cost of living crisis, applies a further pressure, but it has to be the same price. So it's how you're going to get to that price parity and do it at scale and, you know, reduce your CapEx to get there and all of these sort of things. So I think that's probably the shift that I'm seeing in the market for climate tech products or solutions is, yeah, it's really about the economic feasibility at scale. And that's what I feel like VCs are sort of drilling down on. And that's why it's a lot tougher, because a lot of these technologies don't have a solution to get to price parity, other than a lot of people just say, oh, once we have $1 billion plan, it'll just be price parity, which isn't necessarily true.
And not necessarily compelling either for the VCs, because it makes it more difficult. There was a change really when that late 2021 from a tech space where the market, in terms of the stock market, had a turn and all the valuations came back to reality a little bit. And that changed the way everybody was looking at it. That flows through to the market, I guess, as well. What about the first round that you did? How difficult was that? And was it daunting to raise money?
Yeah, I definitely think it felt like a great, even though we had a minimal viable product, we had something out there that we trialed, traction. We'd spoken to customers. We did a pre-seed round from angel investors. Even then, felt complete imposter syndrome because we didn't have a product on the market. And I was like, this just feels like a Ponzi scheme. Like we're taking money for something we will get.
Yeah, right.
And so even I very genuinely believed in the product, and you know, it's turning into somewhat of a success story, and it's going extremely well. We've got revenue, we've got a product, people like it. But back in those early stages, I was like, how are we raising money for something that realistically, I think we'd at that point done about $100,000 in 12 months in revenue, which is pretty good for a pre-seed investment. But like even then, I was still like, yeah, but we've got so much that we want to do, and we've done like 2% of it. How could we like raise money for that? Because that's coming from the wine industry and really coming from architecture, like two very physical things where you wouldn't, I guess, sell a product once it's done almost. And so it was really hard for us to kind of grasp that idea of fundraising in that kind of manner. And so that's probably why we put it off maybe later than what other kind of companies in our space might have done. But we definitely found, yeah, I think people invested at that stage. I imagine they would say they invested at that stage because of what we believed in and our kind of ambition. And because I think the first pitch deck was like, 36 months, we're going to go from 0 to $100 million in revenue. You know, like it was just like, yeah, we can do this. And it wasn't, yeah, look, we want to first build a beta version. We want to first build a pilot plan. We want to do this and this, and then we'll test the market. It was kind of like, no, we're just going to hit go and just absolutely sprint and see what happens. And maybe that's a bad approach, but I think the people invested because we were thinking like that.
But in terms of the product itself, what's it made of? Because I've read that it says potato skins. Is that right? Or is that just one aspect of it?
We actually use about 12 different materials. So it's sort of hard. We're trying to figure out how we talk about that because it's not as clean cut. We use a lot of different bio-based materials, from plant-based oils, so soybean oils and sunflower oils, to currently working on seaweed-based products, to also working with other starches, potato starch. So yeah, it's kind of hard to kind of like, we don't use a majority of anything. So it's sort of a mixed match. And that was really in that kind of, how do we create a formulation based on compounds that is readily available sort of materials today. And then I guess what we've been working on and for a long time is producing, so kind of like vertically integrating the business so that we can be the raw material producer and the manufacturer. And that was that's the product roadmap or the technology roadmap we're working on. And we've been active in producing a biopolymer called PHA, which is biodegradable in marine environments as well as being compostable, but having tensile properties that perform extremely well in, you know, stretch wrap and other products. So we've been developing that for some time. We've been active in using green hydrogen and CO2 emissions to produce PHA. We've got fantastic results. It's all about getting the revenue to a point. So, you know, if we can do $50 or $100 million a year in revenue, then someone's going to give us the $250 million to go and build a plant. Whereas if we're doing $1 million a year in revenue, it's a bit of a stretch to ask for 250 mil.
Yeah.
We've been developing that technology with the idea of getting the revenue to a certain point to then go on building that facility and vertically integrating the business.
And in terms of your backgrounds, a vineyard and a wine label, and how does that prepare you for doing this? Presumably there's some things that cross over that you just never thought would. I'm interested in that.
Yeah, both in architecture and winemaking. I know they sound like romantic careers, and they are, but sometimes there's a lot of problem solving, like designing and building it. Actually, designing and building, worked on projects from the MCG to museums in the Middle East, like done some really big, exciting projects, but like they're just fraught with so many challenges and just things going wrong. And so just like problem solving, like large infrastructure projects is really, really tough. And so that's been like a really critical part that's played a massive role. But also the importance of design and looking at our brand. We have a very strong brand. It's featured on a lot of great sort of media channels. And that's because we tell a really good story. And I think that's also driven by Julia's background in architecture. And it's been really critical. And then I guess like I run the innovation and manufacturing side of the business. And like I studied agriculture. I did a bit of chemistry and biology, and then working in the wine industry, you're using nature to create a product that you need to sell. And that's more or less what we're doing now. So there is that there. And I think in the same way, it's just a lot of problem solving. You've been a vineyard in the growing season. You've got a huge rain event coming that'll wipe out your crop with powdery mildew if you don't get, your sprays out, especially if you're spraying organically and you've got a certain spray regime. And this is like a lot of problem solving. How do you get these things to work in your favor and then harvest at the exact right time to then produce a really high quality product? A lot of skills that carry over. They're not like a natural sort of fit. I think it's usually like you've studied chemical engineering, you worked at a startup, and then you raise money to do your own biotech. The usual pathway, and makes sense. So it's a very unconventional pathway, but it's worked well for us.
Yeah, well, I think there's a lot of unconventional pathways these days. I mean, because starting a business these days is something that lots of people do, and they come from very diverse backgrounds and bring unique insights. I think that's interesting. And that's often where, like you're talking about, where the problems that you've identified that you want to solve come from, is looking at things that you probably saw in your own industry is the seed for it in many respects. So you've got a unique insight to start with, which is where it sort of starts. What about the biggest challenges? You've gone from an idea to now manufacturing and the whole process. What was the biggest challenge that you faced along the way, would you say, or some of them?
Yeah, I think it's a really hard one to kind of communicate, but I mean, this goes back to the previous point around like when VCs invest in a founder that maybe has an unconventional pathway. I think that's not entirely relevant to that industry. I think it's really down to the founder's ability to pick and manage talent that can help them build a successful business. I think that's the biggest challenge. And if you can do that really well, then the sky's the limit. Like if you can get a really good finance function in place that can help you make decisions, that's really critical. And we haven't always nailed it. And we've brought on people that have nailed it. And it's a really hard one to sort of navigate that. Then I think same with the technology sort of support, bringing on, you might not be a polymer chemist, but bringing on a great polymer chemist who can help you build that technology roadmap and hit that. And I think getting the right talent at the right time and managing the people to kind of help you fulfill the vision of the company, working together as a team. I think honestly, that's probably the toughest thing. And it's not to say we've hired people that haven't worked out. I mean, yeah, of course we have, but like, I guess it's just sort of, doing that really well is probably the hardest thing. There's a lot of other hard things. Like, we've made products that haven't worked, they've gone to market, people have used them and they're like, hey, this didn't work.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Brought it back. And there's all of that stuff. But like everyone's going to have those problems. But I think the biggest challenge and like opportunity, like where you might be the most successful business is attracting great talent and helping them help you build the company.
What year did you start the business, Jordy?
2019.
2019. So in that 5 years, what would you say the biggest lesson you've learned has been?
I think the biggest lesson is sometimes it's good to be patient. So as a founder, you're always focused like, I just need revenue so that I can unlock that next level of funding or unlock this next level of debt. And I said to do that, I just need a customer and I just need a product. And you're really aggressively in this sort of cycle of like, I just need this to work out. And sometimes it actually works out better if being patient, being calm, focusing on your own mental well-being, focusing on your own health and prioritizing that part will actually yield greater benefit in the outcomes of the business than just sort of constantly and aggressively in that kind of like startup cycle and mindset. I've found just in the last probably six months, I've really focused a lot more on health and well-being.
Yeah.
And I feel like companies doing the best they've done.
Yeah.
And I know like Julie's the same because we are co-founders and co-CEOs, and yeah, we've both put a lot more effort and energy into ourselves and being a bit more patient and being more calm in our approach to when there is a really big problem and it feels like the end of the world. It's just a bit more patience and calmness. So yeah.
Yeah, that's really important to be able to do that and take that step back. I think you've got a clearer mind when you do those things. And at the end of the day, you're the engine room, you guys are, for when that happens. So how you turn up every day and your mindset is what drives everything else in the end, right?
Exactly. Yeah, 100%. And like sets the tone for the culture of the business. If you're manic and angry when things go wrong, like everyone's going to be manic and angry and that breeds terrible culture. But if you take a step back, it might feel like a problem is the end of the world and that company's going to wrap up because of this thing that's about to happen. If you take a step back and breathe and work through it as a team, you're probably going to get much better results and have a lot more fun doing it.
Yeah. How many people in the business now, Jordy?
Just under 20.
Yeah, okay. And in terms of managing people, the biggest learning curve from that perspective, or did it come naturally to you?
I definitely wouldn't say it becomes natural because I've never managed anyone before. And I just always like being friends with people, but you can't always be friends with people and be a manager. And so like learning those dynamics, but then again, like you got to be angry and set the tone sometimes. So yeah, kind of navigating that for the first few years, I was really bad at and leverage some of our investors, Simon Griffiths from Who Gives a Crap and Darren Thomas from Thomas Foods, really great people that we've leaned on that are fantastic at managing people, fantastic at growing businesses and kind of navigating those challenges, both sort of small, intimate and large sort of scales. And I think it's definitely something I'm constantly trying to work on and improve on. And I think if you actually behind closed doors chat to any founder, I think they're all the same problems. Like being a good manager is really, really tough.
Yeah. And you're talking about some of the investors in the business. When you went through that process and you've done a couple of iterations or a couple of raises along the way, how much emphasis do you put on the fit and your values or the types of investors you bring in? How important is that? Because you talk to different people and it makes a big difference, the types of investors and the expertise they bring to the table as well.
Totally. I think when we speak to investors, I think it's like, how can they help us get more customers or how can they help us run the company better? Like those are like the two things.
The two things, yeah.
Yeah. And if they can sort of tick one of those boxes quite well, then we're really excited to have them on board. And like Darren Thomas is without a doubt the most meaningful investor we have on our cap table. He's on the board and plays a really meaningful sort of role in helping us navigate the company. But, you know, his background is in meat and agriculture, very different to packaging, but like without a doubt the most skilled operator we work with and has helped us sort of guide some of the challenges and success stories we've had today. And so, yeah, like technically it would be like, oh, I don't really know how this would fit, but he's also unlocked most of our biggest customers and helped us sort of find customers, and which he didn't sort of sell to us. He was kind of more just excited about the product, wanted to use it in his business, but then ended up being the most meaningful sort of shareholder investor. And so, yeah, I don't know, you can kind of have a framework or have an idea, but sometimes some things work out different to what you kind of planned and it's really well.
Sometimes that's serendipitous in some ways, and you can look at it in hindsight, but you're also learning as you go in terms of the investors you're bringing on. And that also leaves a bit of a clue in terms of some of the things you might look for in the future, presumably as well.
100%. Yeah, exactly right.
Although the organizations and institutions presumably become bigger as you go to the next step. So it's a different dynamic altogether in many ways as well. What's the future hold? If you look forward 5 years and 10 years, where do you want to get to? What are you trying to do?
Yeah, I mean, like I sort of said earlier, working on that technology to sort of vertically integrate the business and working with green hydrogen, CO2 emissions to produce PHA is something very sort of passionate about at a large scale. And I think especially as we sort of see more green hydrogen projects come online, and there's a real clear pathway. We're not quite there yet, and it's kind of just like waiting and getting ready for when that happens, and just getting really excited about that. But then equally, I'm super excited about sort of the opportunities we've got in the pipeline overseas, working with some of the world's biggest users of stretch wrap, and their excitement about us, and the sort of long kind of conversations that we've been working on for 12, 18 months. But seeing the interest in people taking an interest in Great Wrap and wanting to take that to North America and Europe, you can't help but get excited about those sort of opportunities, because we're a very small country in terms of what we consume in terms of stretch wrap comparatively to North America and Europe, and thinking about the CO2 impact we can have and the plastic waste impact we can have. Yeah, I get really excited about that sort of growth.
And in terms of those sorts of things, so you're Australian primarily in terms of all your customers now, or is
Yeah,
but the next phase is to go overseas?
absolutely. Yeah. From a potential impact perspective, we'd love to focus on regions where the waste infrastructure is quite poor, because that's where we could in the future have a greater impact, where we're producing PHA, our material is marine degradable, it's compostable. Composting plastic is very easy to do at a small scale and more fragmented waste infrastructure. So I get really excited about those sort of opportunities equally as much as North America and Europe. But overall, yeah, our plan is to grow and go overseas. But we want to have a large portion of the market share in Australia and New Zealand as well.
Yeah, right. How do you balance that dynamic of trying to make sure you consolidate at home and taking advantage of the opportunities overseas?
I think the overseas opportunities, we let that be driven by demand. So there's big partners we're talking to overseas. So rather than kind of go, oh, let's just go chat to 1,000 different pallet wrap customers in the US who are big, and we could chat to Mondelez and Nestle and Mars, and it's all really exciting. Everyone goes, yeah, great. Who's the biggest and who can influence change? And so try and find that person or company in each region and working with them, and then mapping out what the future would look like if we built a plant, and the 5-year sort of journey that would take and go on. So sort of doing it that way and less kind of scattered approach. And then in Australia, and that takes up, maybe 10% of your time. And then in Australia, you're putting 80, 90% of your time into navigating the market here and getting customers here and solving problems for them.
I read that if it ends up in landfill, it breaks down within 1 to 3 years or something like that. Is that?
Yeah, correct. It also depends on different landfills, some compact and bury, and some turn and move. But we always say the most value it will have is if it goes to compost. If it gets to compost, it'll break down. And currently we work with a Geelong-based composter or organic recycler, where all of our Victorian pallet wrap can get collected by customers. It gets sent down to them, and then it gets composted and used in agricultural land. That is awesome. Sequestering carbon, for returning biomass to soils. That's a huge sort of environmental win. So we're sort of yeah, it breaks down there, but is it going to add any value in landfill? Absolutely not. Let's try and focus on adding value. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, no, that makes sense. And in terms of the pricing and that sort of stuff, how price conscious? You were saying before, there's no real green premium anymore. Is that the big challenge, making sure the price is comparable, or is the price already comparable?
It's comparable and competitive, but we're not price parity, and that will come with scale, and that will come with vertical integration. We've been able to save some really large customers money, saving them 10%, and it was in the tens of thousands that we were able to save them. So for some customers, we can save them money. For some customers, we're 10, 15% more, but we're in a ballpark. We're close. It's not double.
Which is a game changer, right? When you go into something that's comparable, and then obviously you're working towards that parity, and then it becomes a complete no-brainer.
Exactly right.
Well, thanks very much for coming on the show. It's been great to hear about the business and the journey. I really look forward to seeing where you get to in the next few years.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, appreciate the chat, and thanks for having us.
Thanks, Jordy.